The church doors blew open with a violent crack. A hush fell over the congregation as the mountain man stepped into the holy sanctuary, dirt on his boots and blood on his knuckles. Don't do this," she whispered, terrified. But he did it anyway, and hell followed him. The year was 1881, and the town of Oak Haven, Colorado, was a place built on silver, secrets, and suffocating propriety. Nestled in the shadow of the imposing Broken Tooth Ridge, Oak Haven was a booming settlement where Eastern money met Western brutality. Mayor Josiah Charlotte had founded the town, carving his fortune out of the jagged earth using the muscle of desperate men and the backing of the Wells Fargo banking syndicate. He ruled the valley with an iron fist, and the jewel of his empire was his daughter, Ava. Ava Charlotte was not a woman. She was an asset. Draped in silk taffeta imported from Chicago and paraded around town like a prized filly, she was destined to marry Owen Patrick. Owen was the heir to the Patrick banking fortune, a man whose tailored suits hid a cruel, calculating nature. To the town, their impending union was the social event of the decade, a merger of local power and Eastern capital. To Ava, it was a death sentence. But above the suffocating social ladders of Oak Haven, high up in the timberline where the air grew thin and the pines whispered ancient secrets, lived Eric Montgomery. Eric was not a man of society. He was a mountain man, a solitary trapper who supplied premium pelts to the Bancroft and Sons outfit down in the valley. Standing over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad as a draft horse and eyes the color of a winter storm, Eric was a living myth to the townsfolk. They called him a savage. They whispered that he had fought alongside the Cheyenne, that he had survived a grisly attack with nothing but a hunting knife, and that he cared for no laws of God or man. He only came down from the mountain twice a year to trade, stepping into the muddy streets of Oak Haven like a wolf wandering into a corral. The townsfolk parted for him, offering a wide, fearful berth. Their worlds were never meant to collide, until the first blizzard of November tore through the valley. Ava had been returning from a fitting in Denver, her carriage navigating the treacherous, winding path known as Dead Man's Pass. The storm hit without warning, a blinding white squall that dropped the temperature below freezing in minutes. Her driver, an older man named Jebediah, lost control of the frightened horses. The carriage skidded on black ice, snapping the axle and rolling into a snowbank just inches from a deadly drop. Jebediah was thrown from the buckboard, his legs shattered. Ava, bruised and freezing in her velvet traveling cloak, crawled from the wreckage only to realize they were miles from Oak Haven, with night rapidly falling. They would have frozen to death before midnight, but the mountain belonged to Eric Montgomery. He found them just as the numbness began to claim Ava's limbs. He didn't speak. He merely assessed the situation, his massive frame effortlessly hauling Jebediah onto his own sturdy pack mule. Without a word, he stripped off his heavy, fur-lined buffalo coat and wrapped it around Ava's trembling shoulders. The scent of pine, wood smoke, and raw, untamed earth enveloped her, a scent that she would never, for the rest of her life, be able to forget. He led them through the blinding snow to his cabin, a sturdy, hand-hewn structure hidden deep within the crags of the ridge. For 3 days, the storm raged, trapping the heiress and the mountain man together. It was within those 4 wooden walls that Ava Charlotte truly opened her eyes. She watched Eric set Jebediah's leg with brutal efficiency and surprising gentleness. She watched him tend the fire, carve wood, and prepare meals from dried venison and root vegetables. There was no pretense in him, no greed, no hidden motives. He was a man entirely comfortable in his own silence, completely self-sufficient. On the second night, sitting by the hearth while Jebediah slept off the laudanum Eric had provided, Ava found herself speaking. She spoke of her impending marriage, the suffocating expectations of her father, and the terror of being handed over to a man like Owen Patrick. Eric listened. He sat across from her, sharpening a skinning knife, the firelight dancing across the rugged planes of his face. When she finally fell silent, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. He stopped his work. He looked at her, truly looked at her, piercing through the expensive clothes and the societal titles. "A bird born in a gilded cage still has wings, Miss Charlotte," Eric said, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. "Question is whether she's got the courage to break the wire." It was a dangerous seed to plant. When the storm finally broke and the sun illuminated the snow-drowned world, Eric hitched his mule and guided them safely to the edge of the town limits. He did not accompany them into Oakhaven. He merely tipped his battered hat to Ava, took back his buffalo coat, and disappeared into the tree line. But as Ava rode back into the manicured, hypocritical world of Oakhaven, she realized with a terrifying certainty that her heart was no longer in the valley. She had left it up on the ridge with a man who didn't even own a proper suit. The return of the mayor's daughter was met with frantic relief and overwhelming fanfare. Sheriff Wade Hickok, a man whose badge was firmly bought and paid for by Mayor Charlotte, interviewed Ava extensively about her ordeal. She lied. With a calm that surprised even herself, Ava claimed that Jebediah had managed to drag them to an abandoned mining shack, where they huddled together until the storm passed. She knew that if the town discovered she had spent 3 days alone in the cabin of the wild mountain man, her reputation would be entirely ruined. Worse, her father and Owen would likely organize a posse to hang Eric for perceived indiscretions. But lies in a small frontier town have a short shelf life. The change in Ava was palpable. She no longer engaged in the idle gossip of the town's elite. She looked at Owen Patrick with barely concealed disgust. And, most dangerously, she began taking her roan mare out for long rides toward the foothills, unchaperoned. She was drawn back to the mountain. She met Eric by the old rusted water wheel at Whispering Pines, a secluded spot hidden from the town's prying eyes. Their illicit romance was a slow, consuming burn. Away from the watchful eyes of her father, Ava was free to laugh, to breathe, to simply exist. Eric, who had spent a lifetime avoiding the complexities of human connection, found himself helplessly anchored to the mayor's daughter. He taught her how to track, how to shoot a Winchester rifle, and how to read the changing weather in the clouds. In return, she read him poetry from her Eastern books, bringing a soft light into his rugged, isolated world. They knew it was a powder keg waiting for a spark. The disparity between them was too vast, the societal laws too rigid. The spark came 2 weeks before the grand engagement gala. Owen Patrick, growing suspicious of his fiancée's distant demeanor and frequent absences, hired one of the Pinkerton men passing through town to follow her. When Owen was presented with the truth that his pristine, aristocratic bride-to-be was secretly meeting with a filthy, uneducated brute of a mountain man, his pride was deeply wounded, and his fury was absolute. He did not break the engagement. The merger of their fortunes was too important. Instead, he chose to break Ava. That evening, Owen cornered her in the parlor of her own home. He confronted her with the mud on her riding boots and the scent of wood smoke in her hair. When she defied him, refusing to apologize, Owen's polished veneer cracked. He struck her. It was a vicious, calculated blow that left a dark bruise blossoming across her cheekbone. "You belong to me, Ava," Owen hissed, grabbing her by the jaw. "You will smile at the gala, you will marry me in the church, and you will never look toward that mountain again. If you do, I will have Sheriff Wade deputize 20 men, and we will hunt your savage down like the animal he is. We will string him up from the highest pine on Broken Tooth Ridge." Terrified for Eric's life, Ava surrendered. The trap snapped shut. She stopped her rides to the foothills. She became the perfect, hollow doll Oakhaven demanded. Up on the ridge, Eric waited. When she missed their first rendezvous, he assumed the weather had kept her. When she missed the second, a cold unease settled in his gut. By the time the grand engagement gala arrived, Eric knew something was violently wrong. The gala was held at the Oakhaven Grand Hotel, a lavish affair bursting with crystal chandeliers, French champagne, and the agonizingly tight corsets of high society. Everyone of importance was there. Judge Harlan Rutledge, Mayor Charlotte, Sheriff Wade, and a dozen hired guns patrolling the perimeter to keep the common riffraff away. In the center of it all stood Ava, wearing a stunning gown of emerald silk. But her eyes were dead, and a heavy layer of powder barely concealed the fading bruise on her cheek. Outside, the bitter wind howled, masking the sound of heavy boots on the wooden boardwalk. Eric had not come down from the mountain to trade. He had come down after a quiet conversation with old Jebediah, the carriage driver, who had hobbled to the edge of town to repay his life debt to the mountain man. Jebediah told Eric about the bruise. He told him about Owen's threats. The heavy, mahogany double doors of the Oakhaven Grand Hotel didn't just open. They were kicked inward with enough force to shatter the brass hinges. The string quartet stopped abruptly. The clinking of champagne glasses ceased. A collective gasp sucked the air from the lavish ballroom as Eric Montgomery stepped into the light. He was a terrifying sight. He wore his heavy buffalo coat, snow dusting his broad shoulders. A Colt Peacemaker was strapped to his thigh, and a massive hunting knife rested at his hip. His storm-gray eyes locked onto Ava, ignoring the 50 wealthy, powerful people staring at him in absolute shock. "Sheriff," Mayor Charlotte roared, his face turning purple. "Arrest this vagrant. Shoot him if you have to." Sheriff Wade and 3 deputies unholstered their weapons, their hands shaking as they leveled their barrels at the mountain man. Owen Patrick shoved Ava behind him, drawing a silver-plated derringer from his coat pocket. "You have made a fatal mistake coming here, mountain trash," Owen spat. Eric didn't blink. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, the floorboards creaking under his weight. He wasn't looking at the guns. He was looking only at Ava. Ava felt her heart shatter. She knew the power of the men in this room. They owned the judges, the law, and the town. If Eric fought them, he would die on the ballroom floor. She broke away from Owen, running a few steps toward Eric before stopping, tears ruining her powdered face. She held up her hands, her voice trembling as she looked at the man she loved. Don't do this, Eric," she whispered, her voice cracking with desperation. "Please. They'll kill you. Go back to the mountain. Just leave." She was begging him to save himself, offering up her own freedom to spare his life. But Eric Montgomery looked at her bruised cheek. He looked at the gilded cage that was slowly crushing the life out of her. He reached up, slowly tipping his battered hat back. "I ain't leaving without what's mine," Eric rumbled. He did it anyway. Before Sheriff Wade could cock his hammer, Eric moved with the terrifying speed of a striking grizzly. He lunged forward, grabbed Owen Patrick by the lapels of his expensive tuxedo, and threw him violently across a table of crystal champagne flutes. Owen crashed in a shower of glass and expensive liquor. The town erupted in absolute outrage. Women screamed. Men shouted for blood. Sheriff Wade fired a wild shot that shattered a chandelier above Eric's head, raining glass down on the screaming elite. Eric didn't draw his gun. He simply reached out, wrapped his massive arm around Ava's waist, and pulled her flush against his chest. With his free hand, he drew the heavy hunting knife, the polished steel gleaming in the dimming light, daring any man in the room to take another step. The silence that followed Eric's move was absolute, broken only by the whimpering of Owen Patrick as he bled among the shattered crystal. The heavy scent of sulfur from the sheriff's wild shot hung thickly in the air, mingling with expensive French perfumes and raw fear. Sheriff Wade Hickok scrambled to recock his revolver, his hands slick with sweat. "Put her down, Montgomery," he barked, his voice cracking under the sheer, imposing presence of the mountain man. "You walk out that door with the mayor's daughter, and you're a dead man before you hit the tree line." Eric did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. The low, gravelly timbre of his words carried to every corner of the lavish ballroom. "Any man raises iron at me, he'd best not miss the heart, because I won't." He took a step backward, pulling Ava flush against his heavy buffalo coat. She could feel the steady, thundering rhythm of his heartbeat against her spine. She wasn't trembling anymore. The gilded cage had been torn open, and the cold, biting wind howling through the shattered hotel doors felt like the first breath of real air she had taken in a lifetime. Mayor Josiah Charlotte, his face a mask of purple fury, grabbed a deputy by the collar. "Shoot him! I don't care if you hit her gown. Just put the savage down." But before the deputies could align their sights, Eric kicked over a heavy, iron-wrought heating stove. The glowing embers and ash spilled across the polished oak floorboards, instantly igniting the dry, decorative velvet drapes framing the entrance. Smoke billowed up, thick and blinding. Screams erupted as the town's elite abandoned their poise, scrambling over one another to escape the sudden blaze. Using the chaos, Eric dragged Ava through the burning threshold and out into the freezing, snow-whipped street. Waiting by the hitching post, completely ignoring the frantic shouts echoing from the hotel, was old Jebediah. He held the reins to Eric's massive black draft horse and Ava's own roan mare. "Knew you'd need a fast exit, son," Jebediah wheezed, tossing Eric his Winchester 1873 rifle. "Now, ride. The mare will have the whole county on your tail by sunrise." Eric hoisted Ava into her saddle with effortless strength before vaulting onto his own horse. "Obliged, Jebediah. Get yourself scarce." They spurred their horses just as Sheriff Wade and two deputies burst through the smoke, coughing and leveling their firearms. A volley of gunshots tore through the night. Wood splintered on the hitching post. Ava heard a sickening thud, and Eric let out a sharp, breathless grunt. He slumped forward for a fraction of a second before righting himself, his jaw locked tight. "Ride, Abby!" Eric roared, slapping the hindquarters of her mare. They tore out of Oakhaven like shadows fleeing the dawn, plunging into the brutal, blinding white of the mountain trail. Ava rode with the desperation of the damned, the wind tearing the emerald silk of her gown to ribbons. Behind them, the town bells began to toll, a frantic, rhythmic clanging that signaled a manhunt. By dawn, the territorial telegraph wires were singing with Mayor Charlotte's rage. According to the historical ledgers of the Colorado State Archives, recorded by archivist William T. Harrison in 1882, the bounty placed on Eric Montgomery's head was a staggering $5,000, dead or alive. It was a fortune that could buy a man a ranch in California. Owen Patrick, his face bandaged and his pride shattered into 1,000,000 irredeemable pieces, funded an additional $2,000 for the immediate hiring of the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. They didn't send just any man. They sent Gideon Cross. Gideon Cross was a legend in the territories, a ruthless, methodical tracker who had run down outlaws from the Badlands to the Mexican border. He arrived in Oakhaven 2 days later, stepping off the Union Pacific train with a custom-tooled saddle, a scoped Sharps rifle, and a pack of vicious bloodhounds. He took one look at the shivering, disorganized posse Sheriff Wade had assembled and sneered in disgust. "You boys are hunting a ghost with a tin cup," Gideon told the mayor in the saloon, slamming a shot of rye whiskey onto the bar. "This Montgomery knows the Ridge better than God knows the Bible. But he's hauling a city woman, and according to the blood on the snow out by the hitching post, he's carrying a bullet. They'll hole up, and when they do, I'll smoke them out." High up on Broken Tooth Ridge, the storm had finally broken, leaving behind a pristine, deadly silence. Inside the heavy timber walls of Eric's cabin, the reality of their situation was settling in. Eric was stripped to the waist, his broad, scarred back illuminated by the firelight. A bullet from the sheriff's deputy had passed clean through his left shoulder, a bloody, ragged through and through that missed the bone but tore the muscle to shreds. Ava did not faint at the sight of the blood, nor did she weep for her ruined life in high society. Instead, she tore the remaining silk of her engagement gown into strips, boiled water in a cast-iron kettle, and cauterized the wound with the blade of Eric's hunting knife, just as he instructed her. As the searing hiss of hot iron hit flesh, Eric bit down on a piece of leather, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the arms of his wooden chair. When it was over, he slumped back, his chest heaving, his forehead drenched in sweat. He looked up at Ava, whose hands were stained crimson, her hair falling in wild tangles around her pale face. She had never looked more beautiful to him. "You should have stayed in the valley, Abby," Eric rasped, his voice rough with pain and exhaustion. "I'm a dead man walking. They won't stop. The mayor's pride won't let him. And Patrick's money will fund the hunt until the end of days." Ava walked over to the heavy oak table, picked up a damp cloth, and gently wiped the sweat from his brow. Her eyes, once hollow and defeated in the ballroom, now burned with a fierce, untamed fire. "My father's pride is built on lies, Eric. And Owen Patrick's money is stained with the blood of the miners he starved out last winter," Ava said softly, her voice cold as the ice outside the cabin. She reached into the bodice of her ruined dress and pulled out a small leather-bound ledger. Eric frowned, wincing as he shifted his weight. "What is that?" "The reason my father was so desperate for this marriage," Ava revealed, flipping open the pages filled with meticulous, handwritten accounting. "I took it from his safe the night before the gala. It proves that the Oak Haven Bank is insolvent. My father and Owen have been embezzling from the Wells Fargo syndicate to cover their losses at the silver mine. If the federal marshals in Denver see this, my father hangs, and Owen spends the rest of his life in a territorial prison." She looked down at the mountain man, her thumb tracing the rough line of his jaw. "I didn't run just because I loved you, Eric. I ran because I refused to be the collateral in their criminal enterprise. They aren't hunting us just to bring me back. They're hunting us to bury this book." Eric stared at her, a slow, grim smile spreading across his weathered face. The heiress wasn't a hostage. She was the executioner. "Well, I'll be damned," the mountain man chuckled, coughing as pain flared in his shoulder. "Looks like we've got a war to win." The siege began on the morning of the 5th day. The haunting bay of bloodhounds echoed off the granite cliffs, signaling the arrival of the hunters. Eric had prepared the ground, laying false trails and boarding the cabin windows with thick pine planks. But Gideon Cross was relentless. By noon, Gideon, Sheriff Wade, Owen Patrick, and 7 heavily armed deputies formed a perimeter in the knee-deep snow. "Montgomery," Gideon's voice boomed across the blindingly bright clearing. "The game is over. You're bleeding out, and we've got you boxed in. Send the girl out, throw your iron in the snow, and we'll take you down to the valley for a fair trial." Inside the cabin, Eric chambered a round into his Winchester. "A fair trial with Judge Rutledge," he muttered, wincing from his wounded shoulder. "That's a quick drop and a sudden stop." Ava stood beside him, clutching a heavy double-barreled shotgun loaded with buckshot. She looked through the wooden slats, her eyes locking onto the impeccably dressed Owen Patrick, who was cowering behind the sheriff's broad back. "I'm not hiding anymore," Ava declared. Before Eric could stop her, she threw the heavy iron bolt and kicked the door open. Stepping out onto the wooden porch, the bitter wind whipped her hair and the tattered remains of her emerald silk gown, now cloaked under Eric's heavy buffalo coat. 50 yards away, the posse immediately raised their rifles. "Hold your fire," Sheriff Wade screamed, panicked at the sight of the mayor's daughter. "Hold your fire!" Owen stepped out from behind the sheriff, his face twisted in an ugly sneer of triumph. "Ava, come here at once! Get away from that savage!" Ava didn't flinch. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the leather-bound ledger, holding it high in the crisp winter air. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Owen." Ava's voice rang clear over the howling wind. "Gideon Cross, you're a Pinkerton man. You work for the law, don't you?" Gideon lowered his scoped sharp's rifle slightly, narrowing his eyes. "I work for the man paying the bounty, little lady. Now, step aside." "The bounty is fraudulent," Ava shouted back. "This ledger belonged to Mayor Josiah Charlotte. It details over $200,000 embezzled from the Wells Fargo banking syndicate, orchestrated by my father and Owen. If you shoot Eric Montgomery, you are doing the dirty work of federal criminals." A deadly, suffocating silence fell over the clearing. The deputies exchanged terrified glances. Stealing from the government was one thing. Robbing the Wells Fargo syndicate was an absolute death wish. Owen's aristocratic composure finally shattered. She's lying. She's been brainwashed by that animal. Shoot him! Shoot them both! He shrieked, drawing a silver derringer and aiming it straight at Ava. Bang! The loud crack of gunfire didn't come from the posse. It came from the cabin doorway. Owen screamed, dropping the derringer as blood sprayed from his shattered right hand. Eric leaned heavily against the doorframe, smoke curling from the barrel of his Colt Peacemaker. Even wounded, his aim was flawless. He had shot the gun right out of the millionaire's grip. Sheriff Wade raised his rifle toward Eric, but the sharp, unmistakable clack of a hammer cocking back stopped him dead. Gideon Cross had pivoted, pressing the barrel of his Sharps rifle firmly against Sheriff Wade's temple. The Pinkerton man spat a stream of chewing tobacco into the snow, glaring at the weeping Owen Patrick. "I hunt outlaws, Patrick," Gideon rumbled with absolute disgust. "I don't shoot women, and I sure as hell don't act as a cleanup crew for embezzlers. If she's telling the truth about Wells Fargo, there's a bigger bounty on your head than there ever was on the mountain man's." Gideon locked eyes with Eric on the porch. A silent, rugged respect passed between them. The Pinkerton recognized the sheer grit it took to survive this ridge, and he respected the hell out of the woman standing bravely beside him. "Take your men and get off this mountain, Sheriff," Gideon commanded softly, "or I'll save the federal marshals the paperwork and blow your head off right here." Sheriff Wade dropped his rifle in the snow. The deputies, realizing they were on the wrong side of federal law, grabbed the blubbering Owen and dragged him back down the trail, leaving the mountain to the man who truly owned it. Gideon lingered for a moment, tipping his hat to Ava. "Keep the book safe, ma'am. You'll need it to buy your peace." Then he turned his horse and vanished into the timberline. Ava lowered the shotgun, her chest heaving as the adrenaline faded. She turned to Eric, who was clutching his bleeding shoulder. A genuine, warm smile broke across his weathered face, and he simply opened his good arm. Ava ran to him, burying her face in the scent of pine and wood smoke that was now her true home. Historical land deeds and territorial telegraphs confirm that Mayor Josiah Charlotte and Owen Patrick were arrested by U.S. Marshals before the spring thaw, their corrupt empire seized by the banks they cheated. As for the heiress and the mountain man, documents from 1885 reveal a massive ranch purchased in the untamed Montana Territory under the names Eric and Ava Montgomery. There, they built a life entirely their own, forged in fire, sealed in blood, and bound by a love that absolutely refused to be tamed. If you felt your heart racing during this wild Western tale, hit that like button and share it with someone who loves a rugged, true-to-life romance. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling historical stories from the untamed frontier. Drop a comment down below. Would you have chosen the dangerous mountain man or the wealthy millionaire? Let us know, and we will see you next time.
Hi, my name is William Sonny, the owner and manager of Iron Cowboy Gardena. After watching the video, father sent his don't do this, but the mountain man did it anyway, and the whole town was outraged. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the courage it took to stand against expectations, power, and fear. Eric knew exactly what he was risking when he walked into that room, yet he refused to turn away from someone he cared about. Beneath all the action and conflict, this story felt like a reminder that real loyalty often requires difficult choices. One lesson I took from the story is that doing what's right isn't always popular. Sometimes standing up for another person means facing criticism, pressure, or consequences. Do you think Eric made the right decision when he entered the church and challenged the town? And what moment changed your view of Ava the most? In everyday life, we may not face challenges on that scale, but we all have opportunities to stand up for people we care about and stay true to our values. If this story meant something to you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy these mountain man stories, a like or subscription is always appreciated.